The Washington Post is calling out President Trump and One America News for those numbers you just saw. One America's Pearson Sharp takes a look.
One America News strives for excellence in journalism, and we often warn our viewers to be wary of fake news. Well, an article published by the Washington Post is a good example of this. The Post's Glenn Kessler takes aim at the facts and figures used by President Trump to describe the staggering cost of illegal immigration on American citizens. It's not completely clear where President Trump got his numbers, but they line up almost exactly with the daily estimates we're providing here at OAN. There are no 100% accurate, exact, to-the-dollar figures for these statistics. The fact is, the government doesn't keep them, and even if they did, the media wouldn't report them. So these are the best estimates available based on the findings of numerous independent groups that demonstrate the scope of the problem. The Washington Post article tries to discredit these figures, but the problem is they relied on some pretty far-fetched and outdated information for their so-called fact-checking. First of all, Kessler says he reached out to us but didn't get a response. The only questions we've received are from viewer emails. To our knowledge, we haven't gotten any requests from the Washington Post. So let's jump into the numbers. One America News pulled information from several sources, including the Federation for American Immigration Reform, also known as FAIR, the Center for Immigration Studies, the Institute for Defense Analyses, and research from Yale and MIT. Using FAIR's numbers, the 12.5 million illegal aliens in the U.S. cost an average of $10,720, totaling $134 billion pre-tax dollars. That's a low estimate, however, based on a peer-reviewed study from Yale and MIT, which puts the number somewhere between an average of 22.1 million and a high of 29.5. Even if we took the low end from Yale, 16 million, that's still 4 million more than the currently accepted figures. So that averages out to some 25 million illegal aliens living here in the U.S. Also low, considering some estimates put the number closer to 40 or even 50 million. It's just some quick math after that, and if you apply the 25 million to FAIR's average yearly cost, you come out with our estimate of $268 billion a year. When factoring in childcare, education, healthcare, medical, and welfare benefits for 25 million people, that's actually a fairly conservative estimate as well. The Washington Post says President Trump's math works out to $8,545 per year, which means Kessler is claiming Trump's number is actually a lot lower than many other estimates. Besides that, Kessler is trying to corner Trump on a trivial margin of just $470. Well within a rounding error when you're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars a year. So now that we have our numbers, let's take a look at some of the claims by the Washington Post. To begin with, the author, Glenn Kessler, has his own history of troubled reporting on immigration going back years, with even his fellow leftists mocking him for being logic challenged. Kessler relies on data from the Department of Homeland Security from back in 2015. That's already 4 years out of date, and as we'll see, these numbers keep climbing every single year. If we go with current numbers, Border Patrol officials claim roughly 1 illegal alien slips by for every 2 that are caught. That's based on data from 2014, 2015, and 2018, averaging out to 200,000 illegals successfully crossing into the U.S. every year, or about 547 every single day. From those numbers, 2 million more illegals will be comfortably living in America within the next decade. It's absurd to think that we're catching every single person who crosses. So if the Border Patrol says that we're catching about 400,000 a year and 200,000 are escaping, how is it possible that the number of illegal aliens in the United States hasn't changed in over 13 years, as the Washington Post claims? And these figures are low. Senior Border Patrol agents estimate a minimum of 5 illegal aliens enter the U.S. for every 1 captured, which makes sense considering barely a quarter of the U.S. border with Mexico is protected by a barrier. Defending their conclusion further, the Washington Post falls back on the Cato Institute, which rabidly attacks the Yale and MIT study. Yet Cato relies on similar left-leaning sources for its own data and criticizes FAIR for using the children of illegal aliens in its count. But FAIR includes these numbers because those children and their burden on the U.S. taxpayer wouldn't exist if their parents hadn't come over here in the first place. And most astonishingly, Cato suggests one way to lower costs of immigration is simply to cut back on immigration enforcement. That's right. To keep the cost of immigration down, stop enforcing it. Despite the attacks on the Yale and MIT findings, that study takes a very conservative estimate and, based on the surrounding data, aims even lower. All of the other estimates are vastly higher than the current widely accepted figures, which are alone at the very bottom of the range. It seems highly unlikely that the lowest figure of all the averages is somehow the most accurate number. And oddly enough, Washington Post is arguing that we can't possibly know how costly these aliens are because we don't know who's here illegally. There's actually a really great way we could know exactly how many illegals are here in the U.S., but Democrats and the media, including the Washington Post, won't let us do it. If the U.S. Census Bureau could question residents about whether or not they were citizens, we'd actually have a pretty good idea about how many people are here illegally. Unfortunately, the census isn't allowed to ask whether or not a resident is a citizen. As a result, there's no way of knowing how many illegals are here. And so comments like this from the Washington Post become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it's worth noting, the census only counts those who are willing to be counted. Bottom line, Kessler and the Washington Post are splitting hairs over the exact number, but they're ignoring the big picture. Illegal immigration is unbelievably expensive, and even if you cut our numbers in half, that's still $134 billion spent every year that could be going to American citizens. President Trump's numbers are well within the ballpark of accepted figures, and it's ridiculous to pretend that a few $100s, one way or the other, somehow makes the costs acceptable. Oh, it wasn't $8,545 like Trump says. It was only $8,075. Well, now you can feel better about it because the Washington Post says it's only $100 billion a year for 12.5 million illegals instead of $200 billion for 25 million. So they decided to give the president 4 Pinocchios for his claims. Well, we give them 15.3 Jiminy Crickets for their efforts to cover up the real and serious problem of illegal immigration with their fake news. You can mince words all day long, but the point is that these numbers from OAN and from President Trump are reasonable estimates pulled from numerous independent sources. And whether you say it's 100 or 200 billion a year, the problem of illegal immigration remains and is growing, and it won't be solved if we try to paint over it and pretend it isn't a problem. Until we, as Americans, address this issue head-on, it will continue to get worse and will hold back not only the United States, but those who wish to come here and be a part of our great nation as well. For One American News, I'm Pearson Sharp.